Peace and love, black family. I salute to you in the spirit and energy of black African consciousness, black African love, black African unity, black African redemption, black African self-determination. This is the Prince of Pan-Africanism, Dr. Umar Johnson, school psychologist, school principal, doctor of clinical psychology. I'm coming to you live from the capital city of China, Beijing. Tonight is my final of 4 lectures that have been delivered here in my historic first annual tour of Asia. Pan-Africanism has finally come to Asia in the person of Dr. Umar Johnson. Today I want to talk about the history of education in America, the struggle to earn, to secure, to bring to African children in the United States an effective and quality public education. Several years ago at the African American Museum in Philadelphia, in fact, 10 years ago at the African American community in Philadelphia. In fact, this is the anniversary. It was on Thursday, May the 24th of 2007. Many of you know that I credit the African American Museum of Philadelphia, second to the Universal Negro Improvement Association and African Communities League, for allowing me the opportunity to present my information, present my talents, and present my intelligence in the form of systematic lecture and seminar delivery. And so 10 years ago, almost to today, because today is what, the 20, I forget the dates. I think today is the 27th or 28th. Well, on the 24th of May, 2007, almost 10 years to the day, this is the 10-year anniversary of a lecture that I did on the history of black education and the law. Black education and the law. And so I'm going to go over some of that right now. I'm going to talk about some of that right now. I want to thank all the brothers and sisters who came out to vibe with me in Tokyo. I want to thank all the brothers and sisters who came out to vibe with me in Nagoya, Japan. I want to thank all the brothers and sisters who came out to vibe with me the other day in Shanghai, China. I had a very wonderful experience in Shanghai, China. Shout out to Brother Mario. Shout out to the good queen down in Tokyo. Shout out to Chelsea in Shanghai, and Champagne from Tokyo, Chelsea from Shanghai, Mario from Nagoya, and Rihanna here in Beijing. So we're going to get into this. Brooklyn, you will be my next stop. After tonight, the next lecture, God willing, will be delivered over 15 hours away from where I sit, travel time, and that will be in Brooklyn, New York City. The Prince of Pan-Africanism returns to the United States, Brooklyn, New York City on Friday night, June 2nd, Brown Memorial Baptist Church, 52 Gates Avenue. Get your tickets right now, princeofpanafricanism.eventbrite.com. We spell Africa with a K, princeofpanafricanism.eventbrite.com. We spell Africa with a K. All right, so Brooklyn, can't wait to see you. Detroit, June 9th and 10th for the National Independent Black Parent Association Training Conference. I'm hoping everyone will be there to help us build the National Independent Black Parent Association. And then Minneapolis, Minnesota on Wednesday the 14th, Minneapolis, Minnesota on Wednesday the 14th of June, followed by the 2017 Juneteenth Power Lecture. The 2017 Juneteenth Power Lecture in Seattle, Washington on Saturday, June the 17th. So looking forward to seeing everybody. Washington, D.C., you will see me for Power Talk, Washington, D.C. on Saturday, June the 24th for Power Talk. Okay. Fort Lauderdale, Florida, September 30th. Houston, Texas, December the 30th. Okay. So, yes, sir. Houston in December. So let's look at this. Okay. 1787. The Northwest Ordinance authorizes the sale of public land for education. giving birth to the land grant idea. I repeat, the Northwest Ordinance in 1787. This is around the conclusion of the Constitutional Convention in Philadelphia. Okay, the Northwest Ordinance authorizes the sale of public lands for education, giving birth to the land grant idea. Public lands for education, the land grant. When you look at the history of historically black colleges, the land grant factors prominently in the creation of many historically black colleges, because it was through the land grants that many HBCUs came into existence. And because those HBCUs were funded by public lands or created through the donation of public lands, that's what keeps most HBCUs from being exclusively African. This is why I don't believe there's a single HBCU in America that doesn't receive some sort of public subsidy. Now, we do have private HBCUs, but even most of the privately founded HBCUs are now contemporarily funded. Even many of the privately founded HBCUs are now contemporarily funded by the federal government and other white philanthropic societies, which makes it almost impossible to have an exclusively African HBCU. And I would even argue from a historical perspective that when HBCUs were created, since black people were never intended to be in America long term, I would argue that when HBCUs were founded, they were founded with the long-term intent of ultimately being usurped by the predominantly white universities that are closest to them geographically and turned into branches or colonies of the PWIs. In other words, in Philadelphia, they're trying to get Cheney to be taken over by Temple University. Okay, when you go around the country, Southern University, they want that to be usurped by the University of Louisiana. They want South Carolina State to be usurped by the University of South Carolina. So I believe it was always the intent to ultimately sabotage and destroy the HBCU legacy, so that by way of making sure these HBCUs would not remain successful and then ultimately be taken back over by the PWIs where they exist. So then in 1788, the United States Constitution is finalized in 1788. The United States Constitution is finalized in 1788. And in the final version of the United States Constitution, okay, it does not contain any rights or privileges or mention of public education. I repeat, the final version of the United States Constitution, which was finally published in 1788, does not include the word education. This is important. This is why Dr. Umar Johnson has always taught that public education is a state right. It is not a federal right. No African child, no white child has a federal right to get an education. Okay? It's important that y'all understand that. There is no federal right to learn. It is a state right. It is your state constitution that gives your child the right to an education. There is no federal right to learn. Okay? Education is a state right, a federal interest, and a local function. Education is a state right, a federal interest, and a local function. What do I mean when Dr. Johnson says education is a state right, a federal interest, and a local function? It is that the state guarantees your child the right to learn. The federal government is interested in education. The government doesn't give you a right to learn, but they are interested in education to the extent of guaranteeing that education does not violate any of your constitutional rights. So, for example, special education was created. Special education was created because, okay, we know the real reason was to resegregate black children. But the official legal reason was children with disabilities were being excluded from learning. Children with disabilities were being excluded from learning. And the federal government considered that to be a what? 14th Amendment violation. a 14th Amendment violation of constitutional protection. The Brown versus Board of Education Supreme Court decision. The Brown versus Board of Education Supreme Court decision. Why did the Supreme Court take up the Brown versus Board decision? You know why? Because in denying black children a right to go to public schools where white children attended, that constituted a violation of the 14th Amendment's guarantee of equal protection under the law. Segregated schooling, as it was argued by Thurgood Marshall and Charles Hamilton Houston, violated the 14th Amendment's guarantee to equal protection under the law. So the federal government is only interested in education to guarantee that your constitutional rights are not violated. That's why when your child's constitutional rights are violated in school, you have the right to contact the United States Department of Education Office of Civil Rights. You have a right to contact the United States Department of Education Office of Civil Rights, okay? Because when you violate a constitutional right, okay, that's a civil rights violation, and that's why the Department of Education has an Office of Civil Rights that makes sure school districts across the country do not violate, okay, the constitutional rights of black people or anyone else for that matter, okay? So, 1788, the United States Constitution does not include any mention of education. That's why Betsy DeVos can eliminate the United States Department of Education. That's why Betsy DeVos, okay, can defund public education. She can kill all the money. Okay, why can they get rid of the United States Department of Education? There's a movement right now to eliminate the United States Department of Education. And the reason there is a movement to eliminate the United States Department of Education is because it's not a right. So many people are concerned that they're paying tax dollars. Remember, America spends more money on education than any other country. Almost any other country. America spends more money on education than almost any other country, although her children have the worst outcomes, ironically. The most money on education, but the worst outcomes when compared to the children of other industrialized nations. Okay? And I would argue the reason why America spends so much money on education is not to help the children, but education is a hustle. Education is a hustle. Okay, if you can get your education hustle on, you're going to make a lot of money. Why? Because every state has a compulsory education law. Children must go to school. So if you can find a way to hustle the schools, you will be hustling for a long time. So, okay, in 1642, let me back up. So 1787, the Northwest Ordinance says you can use public land for education. 1788, the United States Constitution is ultimately published, and it does not include any provisions for a right to learn. But if we go back to 1642, Massachusetts became one of the first states in the United States, okay, to pass a law, okay, to open up schools so that children could be taught society and religion. So children could be taught society and religion, which is basically to be taught patriotism and white Jesus. Massachusetts is also one of the first states to actually strike down segregation law. Massachusetts is one of the first states to create segregation law, and it was also one of the first states to strike down segregation law in the public schools, okay? But public education was founded by who? The church. Churches created the first schools. Churches created the first schools because the first education was always what? Religious education. The first education was always what? Religious education. So before they start teaching you how to count, they had to teach you about Jesus. And that's why schools today still operate on a church foundation. Okay, you come to school, you sit still for 7-8 hours, bored as hell, you can't move, can't talk, you just listen, because education is church. Okay, and just like church, in public school, black children are taught what to think, not how to think. In public school, black children are taught what to think, not how to think. So I would argue that public education is a religion itself. public education is a religion itself. And that's why you have just as many schools as you have churches, and that's why you have just as many churches as you have schools. Now, 1779, Thomas Pedophile Jefferson. In 1789, President Thomas the Pedophile Jefferson. Thomas Jefferson, who was one of our great sexual predators. He's probably the first significant child sex perpetrator in American history. Okay, Thomas Jefferson used to rape our little sister, rest in peace, Sally Hemings. I believe Sally Hemings was 12 years old when Thomas Jefferson started molesting her. And Thomas Jefferson would even take Sally Hemings to Europe on the long boat ride to Europe. There were no airplanes then, so he would be able to molest her while he was on vacation. Thomas Jefferson was a sexual deviant. President Thomas Jefferson also was the first to propose a two-track system of education in the United States. Thomas Jefferson was also one of the first to propose a two-track system of education in the United States. Okay? Thomas Jefferson said education should not be equal. Y'all need to understand this. Public education was never designed to be equal. Never. Public education was never designed to be equal. It wasn't designed to be equal for white students, and it wasn't designed to be equal for black students either. Public education, Thomas Jefferson said, should have two separate tracks. One track for those who would run the society and a lower track for those who would serve it. Y'all need to understand this. I'm going to repeat it. One track for those who would rule the society and another track for those who would serve the society. African people in America, coming from a legacy of enslavement, we were automatically predetermined to occupy the servant level of education, the servant status. This is why every school in America tracks children. Now, tracking is illegal. We know that. But I can guarantee you that every school tracks the children based on what they perceive to be their intelligence and usability within the larger white power superstructure. They're always looking to draft black children that they can use. See, most of the time when we think about drafting, we think about the military. When we think about drafting, we think about the NFL or the NBA. But there is a perpetual everyday draft that's going on in America's public schools where they seek to draft black children who can be used by the power structure to reinforce and expand white supremacy. Barack Obama was drafted. Colin Powell was drafted. Condoleezza Rice was drafted. Clarence Thomas was drafted. Jesse Jackson was drafted. Al Sharpton was drafted. They're always looking for blacks that they can use to serve the master class. Every school tracks. Okay? That's why you have a 6'1", a 6'2", a 6'3". Your child is in the 8th grade. They have an 8'1", an 8'2", and an 8'3". Who's an 8'1"? The children who are considered to be the most intelligent. Who's an 8'2"? The children who are a step behind, who struggle to some degree. And who's an 8'3"? The children who are expected to drop out or go to jail. Facts. 1791, the Bill of Rights. First 10 amendments are passed by Congress containing no reference to an education. The Bill of Rights, 1791, does not include any right whatsoever for a child to learn. You have a right to your religion. You have a right to freedom of expression. You have a right to be free from illegal search and seizures. You have a right to carry a gun. You have a right to a speedy trial. You have a right to a lot of things, but you do not have a right to learn. And this is why you can be made to pay for college. That's why college is not free. Why would they make college free when college is not a constitutionally guaranteed right? 1682, President Abraham Lincoln, another racist, passes the first moral act donating public lands to finance colleges. This is the Civil War. This is the Civil War. The Civil War begins in 1861. Okay? The second year into the Civil War, President Abraham Lincoln passes the first moral act donating public land to finance colleges. Black colleges would grow out of this legislation. So you have a historic precedence of the United States government donating lands to build colleges. In 1865, the Freedmen's Bureau is set up by the Congress. The Freedmen's Bureau, everyone's familiar, right? When slavery ended, the Freedmen's Bureau was created to help the ex-slaves reintegrate into American society. So the Freedmen's Bureau's job was to help you get a job, find housing, get an education, get a loan for your business. Now, ultimately, the Freedmen's Bureau was sabotaged and shut down by the very same government that claimed it was trying to help black people. Frederick Douglass, my great ancestor, Frederick Douglass would take over the Freedmen's Bureau and try to build it back up, but it was too little too late. Frederick Douglass had learned that the United States government was not interested in really helping black people get a strong footing in American society. America will spend $1 billion to give the impression that it's trying to help black people. America will spend $1 billion to try to give the impression that it's trying to help black people, but won't spend $1 billion to assist you. Let's look at the new National Smithsonian Museum for African American History and Culture in Washington, D.C. Here is a $500 million operation. $542 million they will spend on a museum. But they won't even spend $5 for a job. They won't even spend $5 for an education. They won't even spend $5 for housing. The prison industrial complex bill is over $1 trillion. Look at all the money they spend on locking black people up. Money they spend on useless museums for black folks that don't even tell the truth. But they won't spend that money to actually help out black folks. This is the science of white supremacy. So in 1865, the Freedmen's Bureau was set up to help former slaves become self-sufficient. This leads to the creation of segregated schools for black children. Howard University, which is considered the king of all black colleges, Howard University was a Freedmen's Bureau school. Howard University was set up by the Freedmen's Bureau. Okay? Prior to this, black education was illegal in most states and only provided by religious institutions like the Quakers. Okay, it wasn't until the 60s, okay, that black people could legally get an education on a federal level. Some states may have allowed it. But on the federal level, you do not get the right to learn until 1865. Why is this important? This is important because what this says is that for the first 250 years in America as enslaved Africans, because we know we were here longer, before slavery, but as enslaved Africans, for those of us who are the descendants of enslaved Africans, it's important to know that for the first 250 years, you were not allowed to get an education. In fact, American slavery is one of the only types of slavery in human history where the slave could not learn. American slavery is one of the only types of slavery in human history where the slave was not allowed to get an education. The slave was not allowed to get an education. This is important. You also have to understand that the slave codes were set up to punish and to intimidate black people away from getting an education. All of the 13 colonies had laws that provided for the punishing of black people who tried to get an education by another means. Basically, if you were caught learning, you would get whipped, and then after that, they would start taking off a finger. Every time you got caught learning how to write or learning how to read, they would take off one of your fingers. This is why when you see some pictures of our ancestors, enslaved Africans, many of them were missing fingers. You ever see two fingers missing? Sometimes the whole hand would be missing, the thumb would be missing, sometimes an eye would be poked out, okay? And the reason why the fingers were missing was not necessarily because they were injured while working. Certainly that happened sometimes because they could care less about the safety of an enslaved African, okay? Most of the time, if the fingers were missing from the body, it was punishment, okay? So every time you got caught trying to learn how to read or write, they would take a finger off, okay? So basically after 10 attempts of trying to learn, you would have no fingers. And then after that, they would either make you someone who could pull things, you had to pull the carriage, or you had to babysit the younger enslaved children, okay? But if they couldn't use you, sometimes they would just kill you. They're like, you kill a dog, they say kill the dog can't walk no more, the dog only got one leg, put the dog out of his misery. A lot of times they will put our ancestors out of their misery and kill them once they lost all their fingers. I'm still fighting this cold, trying to get over this cold. And then 1896, Plessy versus Ferguson. 1890. The Second Morrill Act is passed in 1890, providing additional funds for colleges, and 17 historically black colleges are created in 1890 from the Second Morrill Act. I repeat, 1890 is significant because in the 1890s, the Second Morrill Act is passed, giving birth to 17 new historically black colleges. Your biggest push in HBCU history, one of your biggest pushes in HBCU history was the Second Morrill Act of the United States Congress, which created 17 new historically black colleges. And then in 1896, you get the famous Plessy versus Ferguson case in 1896, where the Supreme Court maintained that separate but equal train cars for black people was not unconstitutional. In Plessy versus Ferguson, 1896, the United States Supreme Court ruled that separate but equal train accommodations was perfectly constitutional as long as they were equal, which upheld in 1890 Louisiana state law. But this was transportation law. It wasn't education. So in 1899, a famous case, I'm not an Asiatic, my brother. I do not come from Asia. I come from Africa. So I am not Asiatic, nor will I ever call myself that, nor will I ever teach my children that. I'm African, and I have no need to hate myself to such an extent that I got to create a new identity. I am an African. You can be an Asiatic. I respect yourself. I respect your right to call yourself whatsoever you choose. But I and my family, we are forever Africans. So in 1899, Cumming versus the School Board of Richmond, Virginia, the Supreme Court supported a local school board closing a black school due to financial constraints, although it allowed 2 white schools to open. So as early we see in the 1890s, okay, Reconstruction just ends, but in the 1890s, white school districts are shutting down black schools, saying we don't have enough money. And then shutting down the black schools, claiming that they don't have enough money. Since black children could not go to school with white children, that basically meant what? You didn't go to school. You didn't go to school. So they would shut down the black school, but you couldn't go to the white school. And now history is repeating itself, because under new Secretary of Education Betsy DeVos, once again we have what? We have the shutting down of black schools. It's happening. Everything that happened will happen again. Everything that happened will happen again until we understand how to use our knowledge of history to prevent the negative aspects of history from reoccurring. So this tells us that we've already had a movement to shut down black public schools before. This is the 1890s. This is over 150 years ago. They were shutting down schools, claiming what? They didn't have enough money. A lot of you thought they didn't start shutting down schools in the black neighborhood, okay, under the excuse of not having enough money until George W. Bush. But here we have it on paper that as early as 1899, before the 20th century, they were shutting down schools, claiming they did not have enough money. So in 1908, the Supreme Court supports a Kentucky law forbidding interracial instruction at all schools and colleges throughout the state. One thing you need to understand about United States law, one thing we need to understand about United States law is when you study the history of the Supreme Court and racism, when you study the history of circuit court and racism, when you study the history of state court and racism, when you study the history of municipal court and racism, you will find throughout American history that the law, more often than not, sides with white supremacy. I'm going to repeat this again. The law, more often than not, if you do a historical analysis, the law, more often than not, will side with white supremacy. Look at all the Supreme Court cases involving race. 95% of the time, when it was about racism, the Supreme Court defended the racism, the Supreme Court condoned the racism, the Supreme Court upheld the racism. And one of the reasons why I am not a supporter of Barack Obama, one of the reasons why I do not support Barack Hussein Obama is because Barack Obama had the opportunity to appoint, Barack Obama had the opportunity to appoint a black woman for the first time. Barack Obama had the opportunity to appoint a black female, a queen, a queen mother. He had the opportunity to make a black woman a Supreme Court justice. Barack Obama had the opportunity to make a black woman a Supreme Court justice, and instead of making a black woman a Supreme Court justice for the first time in American history, that sellout traitor Barack Obama, that sellout and traitor Barack Obama, I don't give a damn who don't like it. I don't give a damn who don't like it. I'm going to say it again. That sellout and traitor Barack Obama, instead of appointing a black woman to be a Supreme Court justice, he appointed a Latino woman and he appointed a gay white woman. Look at that. He had the chance. The black woman is the only person who has not served on the Supreme Court. And you had a black so-called black president who had the opportunity right before he left office, he could have made a black woman a Supreme Court justice, and instead of making a sister a Supreme Court justice, Barack Hussein Obama gave that to a Latino female who can't stand black people, and he gave another post to a gay white female who cannot stand black people. In fact, I'm going to do a whole video on why Barack Obama will never be a hero at the Frederick Douglass Marcus Garvey Academy. he will never be considered a hero at the Frederick Douglass Marcus Garvey Academy. And I don't give a damn which one of you coon-ass, sellout, don't care about black people want to get emotional talking about he's the first one, leave him alone. I don't give a damn about no black first. I don't give a damn about no black first. I'm not going to leave your ass alone because you the first black. You could be the first black cop. That means we should let you kill black people because you the first one? The problem is you Negroes are stuck on integration. The problem is you Negroes are stuck on being accepted by white folks. And anybody who gets accepted by white folks is automatically considered a hero of yours. Is automatically considered a hero of yours just because they got accepted by black folks. Half you Negroes are no good for us as a people. Half you Negroes are no good for us as a people. The only thing you want out of life is a kiss on the cheek from white folks. The only thing you want from life is a big hug from white folks. The only thing you want from life is for white folks to look at you and say, we accept you. You done lost your damn mind. 1927, there was a court case called Gong Lum versus Rice. This is important. This is important. And this is about the Chinese. And I happen to be in China right now. Shout out to Beijing. I will see y'all tonight for the power lecture. Shout out to Shanghai. I enjoyed you the other day. Shout out to the Africans in Japan. It was a pleasure being in Tokyo and Nagoya. I look to see you guys again in August for the Black Cultural Celebration. In 1927, the Supreme Court supported a Mississippi school district when they forced a Chinese girl to go to an all-black school instead of a white one. This is important. The Chinese wanted to send their child to the white school. The Chinese, this is 1927. Marcus Garvey is about to be deported due to the actions of jealous, self-hating black misleaders like W.E.B. Du Bois, Chandler Owen, Cyril Briggs, and A. Philip Randolph, who wrote to the United States government begging for Marcus Garvey to be deported to Jamaica. This is how trifling black leadership is. They wrote to the white man and begged the white man to get rid of the black man. I'm going to say it again. They went to the white man, the government. Your black leaders went to the government and begged the government to get rid of Marcus Messiah Garvey. So the Chinese are in America, 1927, and the Mississippi told the Chinese kid she got to go to the black school. And the Chinese parents said, we better than black people. We not going to no black school. And they sued. And the Supreme Court supported Mississippi and said, your child don't have a right to go to the white school because y'all not white. And see, one of the things you got to realize, the Chinese and the Latinos, the Mexicans, the Chinese, and the Hispanics all fought to distance themselves from black people. The Chinese, the Mexicans, the Hispanics, they all fought. Native Americans, all y'all want to be Indian and shit, they all fought to distance themselves away from black people. So all you multicultural Negroes, all of you multicultural Negroes who think brown people are your friend, all you multicultural Negroes who think brown people are your friends, need to wake up and smell the coffee. Do your history on the history of brown people in America. Do your history on the history of brown people in America. The Chinese, the Arabs, the East Indians, the Native Americans, the Mexicans, the Chinese, they went to court to keep their kids out of black schools. They went to court to prevent being segregated into black neighborhoods. They went to court to make sure they would never, ever be classified with you. And you the first people running around. You're the first people running around talking about, let's have a brown people's coalition. Let's have an all non-white people's unification movement. Negro, you crazy. Negro, you are absolutely crazy. Nobody's going to take sides with you. There's not a race on earth that has ever taken sides with you. If they have, tell me who. Tell me who. The European Jews used you long enough to allow you to fight for equal rights, and then they stole all the rights and left your ass in the ghetto. The Hispanics used you long enough to take all your rights, and then they dropped your ass off. Don't nobody struggle with black people. Don't nobody struggle with black people. But every time you have to struggle, you want to hold hands with everybody. The black struggle is hands across America. You ain't got no damn friends. You ain't got no damn friends. You multicultural vulture. You multicultural vulture. The problem with the black community is we are totally infiltrated with multicultural vultures. You damn multicultural vultures are a hindrance on the progress of black people. I don't give a damn about no multicultural vulture. Stay away from me, you multicultural vulture. All you Negroes running around. It's like these gangster rappers. These gangster rappers. All they want to talk about is shooting black men and killing black men in the music. And then soon the music go off and somebody asks them about other people exploiting hip-hop. First thing they want to say is, hip-hop is for everybody. Hip-hop is for everybody. You see how our gangster rappers are so effeminate and soft and docile when it comes to letting other people exploit hip-hop? But soon when they go in that booth and start making rap, now they tough gangsters. Now they want to shoot everybody. Now they want to kill everybody. Smoke some weed, sell some drugs. But soon when somebody asks them about other cultures exploiting gangster rap, oh, this for everybody. This for everybody. You damn multicultural vultures filled with self-hate. That's all it is. It ain't nothing but self-hate. It ain't nothing but self-hate. You think it's a coincidence we're the only people in the world who don't believe in self-determination and self-reliance? You think it's a coincidence that we're the only people in the world who don't believe in self-determination and self-reliance? It's because we hate self. You love everybody more than you love yourself. You love everybody more than you love yourself. So the Chinese went to court to keep Chinese kids away from black folks. In 1934, the National Youth Administration was created to give college students the opportunity to earn money while going to college. In 1934, the National Youth Administration was created to give college students the opportunity to earn money while going to college. In 1942, this is significant. Anybody who wants to understand the white welfare state, not the black welfare state, but the white welfare state. One of the things that America did to help white folks get ahead, one of the things America did to help white folks get ahead is in 1942, they created the GED. The GED. The GED, General Education Equivalency Diploma, was created for veterans who left school to serve World War II. Just like the GI Bill, they created the GED for white folks, poor white folks. They created the GI Bill for poor white folks. They gave job preferences for poor white folks, welfare preferences for poor white folks. And then the first thing white folks want to say is black folks need to stop depending on the government for handouts. The whole history of white folks is about getting handouts from the government. The whole history of white people is about getting handouts from the United States government. And they want to tell black people, you shouldn't be dependent on the government. Half the damn white people in America wouldn't be where they at if they didn't depend on the government. The GED was created so when these white men came back for World War II without no diploma, they could take the GED test and still get a job. It's called white welfare. It's called white welfare. It's called white welfare. And then they created the FHA, Federal Housing Authority. They created the FHA, Federal Housing Authority, to give broke white people low interest loans so they can move into the suburbs. That's right. The FHA was created to create the black ghetto. The FHA was created to create the black ghetto. The Federal Housing Authority of the United States government was created to give broke down, poor ass white people low interest loans so they can move out the ghetto, move into the suburb. They didn't have good jobs. They didn't have education. They didn't have no damn money. But the FHA helped poor white folks escape to the ghetto, escape from the ghetto to the suburb by making their down payments. They put up the money. The government put up the money to get the poor white folks out of the ghetto. And then when black people tried to get an FHA loan, they said you didn't qualify. When black people tried to get an FHA loan, they said the money was used up. This is how they made ghettos. The white people were the first people in the ghettos. The Jews were the first people in the ghettos. In fact, the word ghetto is a Jewish word. The word ghetto is a Jewish word. But the government helped the poor whites get out the ghetto, and they trapped the blacks in the ghetto. The government helped the poor white people get out the ghetto, and then they trapped black people in the ghetto. Facts. If I'm wrong, prove it. If I'm wrong, prove it. And then in 1943, there was a case called Barnett versus West Virginia. Barnett versus West Virginia Board of Education. The Supreme Court maintained that public schools cannot force students to salute the flag or pledge the flag. In 1943, the Jehovah's Witnesses. In 1943, the Jehovah's Witnesses. In 1943, the Jehovah's Witnesses sued the West Virginia School District and said, we don't want our child pledging the flag. Our children don't pledge the flag. And the Supreme Court sided with the Jehovah's Witnesses, who are white folks, and said, you cannot make children pledge the flag. 1942. So y'all can thank the Jehovah's Witnesses. Y'all can thank the white racist Jehovah's Witnesses. Y'all can thank the white racist Jehovah's Witnesses for making it possible for you to not have to pledge the flag. Now, the question you got to ask yourself, is why didn't black people challenge the pledging of the flag? We should have challenged the pledging of the flag because, after all, we were enslaved, destroyed. We were castrated, sterilized, dismembered, dehumanized by this United States government. Why was it the Jehovah's Witnesses and not black folks who fought for their children not to pledge the flag? That should have been us. Why was it the Jehovah's Witnesses? Why was it the Jehovah's Witnesses instead of black folks? You want to know why? Because you love America. You love America. You love everything America has done to you. You love everything America stands for. Black people love white people. That's why you will never be at the forefront for any change that requires you to stand up against the government. You will never be at the forefront for any change that requires you to stand up against the government because you love America. Stop lying. Why your children don't have independent schools? Why black children in America don't have independent schools when they people are $1 trillion economy? Why don't black folks in America have independent schools when their children are suffering and being special educated and medicated and kicked out and homosexualized? Why you don't have your own schools yet? Because you love America. You love America. Stop lying. You love America. Why are you swinging from Barack Obama's nuts when he ain't do nothing for black people? Why are you swinging from Barack Obama's nuts when he ain't never do nothing for black people? Because you love America. You love him. Stop. You love America. Let's just cut this shit out. Y'all love America. You dashiki Negroes, you love America. You damn scholars talking that Egyptian shit, you love America. All you Negroes with locks in your hair and Egyptian names, Ankh, Ptah, Ra, Khnum, Sekhmet, Geb, you love them. Stop the shit. You love white folks. Conscious community. Why y'all not doing? Because you love a white. You love America. Stop this bullshit. That's why we not doing no work. You love America. Can we stop lying? You love America. You love America. Let's get on back. (1944), the GI Bill was created to give higher education to veterans. 1944, the GI Bill was created to give higher education to military veterans. 1946, the Fulbright Act was passed, enabling Americans to study and teach abroad. In 1946, the Fulbright Act was passed, enabling Americans to study and teach abroad. If you're going to get a college degree in America, consider getting a job outside of America. A black person with a college degree in America may never get a job, but a black person with a college degree in China will get a job. A black person with a college degree in India will get a job. A black person with a college degree in Central or South America will get a job. If you want to get your education in America, consider working outside of America. 1949, Thurgood Marshall launched the first battle in the school desegregation war after getting 20 plaintiffs to file a class action lawsuit against the Clarendon County School Board. The Brown versus Board of Education was the last stop, the last suit in a collection of 20 lawsuits. The Brown versus Board of Education Supreme Court decision was one of 20 different lawsuits to desegregate American public school. It was a consolidation of 20 different lawsuits. It was not the first lawsuit to desegregate the schools, but it was the most significant lawsuit to desegregate the schools. Several cases were lost on the way to Brown, but they never quit. They lost a lot of the lawsuits on the way to Brown, but Thurgood Marshall and Charles Hamilton Houston, who passed away during this process, they never quit. Shout out to them. In 1954, for the first time, the Supreme Court intervened in education in a major way, and separate but equal was deemed unconstitutional. Separate but equal was deemed unconstitutional. The Brown decision prohibited state-sanctioned segregation, but it did not prohibit de facto segregation, meaning that the schools did not have to force education. The schools did not have to force integration. They simply couldn't prevent it. I want y'all to hear that, because in America, you have de facto racism, de facto segregation, de facto Jim Crow. De facto means what? It means if it happens, but we didn't create it, it's not our fault. Did y'all hear that? De facto segregation means if it still happens, but we didn't do it, it's not our fault. If it still happens, but we didn't do it, it's not our fault. I need y'all to understand de facto. In other words, most schools are still black in America today, right? Most public schools are still predominantly black. You can't sue the government unless you can prove they systematically created it. They said if it happens on its own, that's de facto. We cannot be held responsible for de facto racism, de facto segregation. We can only be held responsible for that racism that we purposely put in place. Alabama, Georgia, Virginia, Mississippi, South Carolina, they refused to adhere to the Brown versus Board of Education decision, okay, which forced the military. This is when the military had to get involved and escort black kids to school because the southern states said, we don't give a damn what the Supreme Court says. We're not letting black kids go to school with white children. And then in 1955, Milton Friedman, a United States economist, argues for school vouchers in an attempt to resegregate black and white kids. Y'all need to understand this. School vouchers didn't start with Betsy DeVos. School vouchers go back to 1955. They've been trying to destroy black public schools with school vouchers since 1955. They've been trying to destroy black public schools with school vouchers since 1955. And it wasn't even an educator. It was an economist. It was an economist who gave birth to the school voucher meeting, not the school voucher movement. Not an educator, but an economist gave birth to the school voucher movement. Why? Because the economists knew that if we give parents the right to take their children elsewhere, okay? If we give children the right to learn elsewhere with a couple of public dollars, we can shut down the black public schools. You understand me? 1963, the Higher Education Act is created. In 1963, this is the same year they killed Medgar Evers. 1963, the same year they killed Medgar Evers, the Higher Education Act gives the United States Congress responsibility to assist colleges with grants and loans to construct academic facilities. Grants and loans to colleges to assist with the construction of what? Academic facilities. This is also the law that start giving white schools money to educate black children. This is also the law that starts giving white schools money to educate black children. This is also the law that starts giving white colleges money to educate black college students. But here's the $1 million question. Here's the $1 million question. The $1 million question is, why are you giving white colleges money to educate black children when you have over 100 historically black colleges who are struggling financially? Why not give that money to the historically black colleges? Why are you giving that money to white colleges? It's because you wanted to sabotage. They wanted to sabotage historically black colleges, so they started giving money to white schools to attract black children away from the white universities. Okay? And then in 1963, in Chicago, they create the learning disability. In 1963, in Chicago, they create the learning disability. The failure of a child with normal intelligence to learn an academic skill. The failure of a child with normal intelligence to learn an academic skill. The failure of a child with normal intelligence to learn an academic skill. In 1963, they invent the learning disability in Chicago. 1964, the Civil Rights Act is created, outlawing segregation, and the Economic Opportunity Act is created, which leads to the community control movement of the 1960s. The Civil Rights Act and the Economic Opportunity Act, that gave rise to the community control of the black community. That was the bread basket. Okay? The bread basket, Adam Clayton Powell. Adam Clayton Powell said, don't shop where you can't work. Adam Clayton Powell said, don't shop where you can't work. Adam Clayton Powell said, don't shop where you can't work. And brothers and sisters, we need to go back to that. We need to go back to that. We need to go back to that. Don't shop where you can't work. Don't shop where you can't work. Don't shop where you cannot work. Facts. 1965. And see, also in 1964, we said we want to control our own schools. In 1964, we said we want to control our own schools. In 1964, the community control of public schools began. Black people said, we want to control who gets hired, who gets fired, what teachers are in the classroom, what the curriculum is. But then they came with the charter schools in 1990 and bought off the leaders by giving them their own charter school, and the community control movement died. I said they created the charter schools in 1990 to buy off the leaders of the community control movement by giving them their own charter school, and you ain't heard about community control of the public schools ever since. Facts. Facts. 1965, Elementary and Secondary Education Act is passed by President Lyndon Baines Johnson as part of the War on Poverty. In 1965, the Education and Secondary Education Act is passed by Lyndon Baines Johnson as part of his War on Poverty, which was really nothing more than a war on black folks. War on poverty was war on black folks. This is also, okay, around the time that the war on drugs gets started. The war on drugs, which was nothing but a war on black men, which would be intensified under the presidential administration of Ronald Reagan, which would be intensified under the presidential administration of Ronald Reagan following the CIA dropping off crack cocaine in the black communities in the 80s. So in 1965, this gave birth to educational pimping. Educational pimping. Educational pimping was created with the Lyndon Baines Elementary and Secondary Education Act, because now they were spending millions of dollars to help economically deprived children, millions of dollars to help educationally deprived children, okay? No Child Left Behind was a reauthorization of this, okay? And then you also got in 1965 the Bilingual Education Act. In 1965, the Bilingual Education Act, which mandates that children who speak another language receive bilingual education to meet their educational needs. Children who speak another language are supposed to be taught English in order to receive an education. But what we find is this only counts if the child is Spanish. African children are systematically discriminated against in American ESOL programs. When you come to America and you speak Igbo or Yoruba, you speak Zulu, Swahili, you speak Akan, you don't speak no English, they don't help you find no class that teaches you English. They only care about the Hispanic kids, the Puerto Ricans and the Cubans. If you a black child in American public school and you don't speak English, they don't give a damn about you. They put you in special ed. They don't give a damn about you. They put you in special ed. And unfortunately, so many of our African immigrant parents come to America thinking they better than us. That when someone like Dr. Umar Johnson wants to come to the African community in America and say, let me train your parents on how to advocate for their kids, they run away from me and run to the damn white man. Because he gave you refugee status. From a damn war that he started. When I try to help you, you run away from me and run to the white man because he gave you refugee status. And so now you think you've been blessed by God because the white man gave you refugee status in the United States. A refugee status that wouldn't even be necessary if the white man didn't start the war that you had to run away from in the first place. And then they tell you to stay away from black folks in America, so y'all get to America, start acting like y'all don't know who we are. But your damn kids is being special educated, miseducated, and black immigrant youth are one of the fastest growing prison populations in America. Black immigrant youth, black African immigrant youth are one of the fastest growing prison populations in America because you damn Africans come to America, some of you, and ain't got no damn Pan-African consciousness. Come to America and you ain't got no damn Pan-African consciousness. Thinking you better than me when everything you get is the result of the struggle that we have been through. Everything you get is the result of the struggle that we have been through, and you want to turn your nose up at us because the white man that gave you a refugee status card. Get your ass out my face. I don't deal with sellout African Americans, and I damn sure ain't gonna deal with no sellout Africans from the continent. I don't deal out with no sellout African Americans, and I damn sure ain't gonna deal with no sellout Africans from the continent. 1966. In 1966, the Coleman Report argues that black children benefit from integrated schooling and sets the stage for large-scale busing. This is 1966. They killed Malcolm in 65. After they killed Malcolm, they gave the black community reparations in the form of busing. After they killed Malcolm, they gave the black community reparations in the form of busing. After they killed Malcolm, they gave black folks reparations in the form of busing. And they started busing black kids to white schools. They started busing black kids to white schools the year after they killed Malcolm. Okay? 1969. 1969 comes, and in 1969 we get a famous case called Tinker versus Des Moines, Iowa Independent School District. In 1969, we get a famous case called Tinker versus Des Moines, Iowa Independent School District. The courts ruled in this case that students do not lose their constitutional rights in school, but that those rights must be applied according to the special characteristics of the school environment. Okay? And this relates primarily to speech and clothing. You cannot control a child's dress code. You cannot control a child offering their opinions in public school unless the dress and the speech is interfering with the educational process. If the dress and the speech interferes with the educational process, if the dress and the speech interferes with the educational process, then you have a right. Then you have a right to control the speech and the clothing. But a children's First Amendment freedom of expression rights, a children's First Amendment freedom of expression rights are guaranteed in public school and can only be interfered with if they interfere with the educational process in the school. So brothers and sisters, you got a bird's eye view of Beijing. This is Beijing, China, the capital of the Communist Party, the ruling government, the only government. This is Communist China, and we are in Beijing, the capital city, where the Prince of Pan-Africanism will be giving a power lecture tonight to brothers and sisters from around China who are living here. Okay? So, 1970s. In response to forced integration in busing, charter schools are proposed in the 1970s. In the 1970s, in response to forced integration in busing, charter schools are first proposed in New England to give teachers an opportunity to try new educational ideas with public money. But the truth is, the charter schools were really created to help the white kids get away from the black kids on a public dollar. 1971, court case known as Swan versus Charlotte. 1971, a court case known as Swan versus Charlotte, the Supreme Court permitted busing, school closings, and faculty redistribution to integrate the public school. The Supreme Court said if you have to bus the children, you can. If you have to close certain schools in order to integrate, you can. And if you have to redistribute the faculty, you also can. 1972, we get the Title IX educational amendments. In 1972, we get the Title IX educational amendments to the Civil Rights Bill, which says any school receiving federal funds must provide the same educational opportunities to girls as it do to boys. Any school receiving federal funds must provide the same educational opportunities to girls as it did to boys. In 1973, a case known as San Antonio Independent Schools versus Rodriguez. In 1973, a case known as the San Antonio Independent Schools versus Rodriguez says, educational equality is a state responsibility. Educational equality is a state responsibility. Federal government is not responsible for funding inequalities in school districts. States are responsible. Y'all see this? The feds say they are not responsible for inequities in schools. States are responsible. In addition, it says state funding inequalities were supported by Supreme Court that held any kind of funding system was acceptable. Currently, Pennsylvania is second only to Texas in educational funding inequity. Okay, I hope y'all hear what I said. Did y'all just hear what I said? I need to repeat it because it was significant. I just said that the Supreme Court said that although educational facilities, although children had to be afforded the same quality of education in the same school or in the same district, right? The funding of schools did not have to be equal. Did y'all hear that? Children had to receive the same quality of education in the district, but the funding did not have to be equal. I need y'all, this is why black children don't get the same amount of money spent on their education. Okay? This is why black children don't get the same amount of money spent on their education that white children get in America. Because the law says that although you had to provide equal opportunity, you didn't have to provide equal funding. The law said you had to provide equal opportunity, but you don't have to provide equal funding. Are y'all following that? Are y'all following that? So how do you make the schools equal when you don't have to guarantee equal funding? That's the racism. And this is the law today. So you have a place like Philadelphia, and then right next to Philadelphia, you have a place like Lower Merion School District. And in Lower Merion School District, they might be spending over $25,000 a year per child. In Philadelphia, they might only be spending $9,000 a year per child. And Supreme Court says that's perfectly legal. That's perfectly legal. As long as you provide equal opportunity, you do not have to have equal funding. Facts. Facts. Exactly. It's a contradiction because quality cannot be the same if you don't have the same funding. Quality cannot be the same if you don't have the same funding. What did I tell you? When you study the history of law in America as it relates to racism, when you study the history of law in America as it relates to racism, the law always sides with racism most of the time. The law sides with the white supremacists most of the time. Okay? 1973, Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act of 1973 prevents discrimination in public school on the basis of a person's disability. A child must be given reasonable accommodations, must be offered involving activities that promote inclusion, including learning. This is civil rights law and must be distinguished from education law that provides such protections for students with disabilities, but not necessarily medical and physical disabilities. Okay? Remember I told you, if your child has ADHD, if your child has ADHD, don't put him in special ed. Get him a 504 plan. The 504 plan that your child, says your child, can receive reasonable accommodations in school. Your child can receive reasonable accommodations in school. He don't need special ed. All he needs is a 504 plan. Get your child a 504 plan. Tell Portland to come to Seattle. Tell Portland to come to Seattle. Tell Portland to meet me in Seattle on June 17th. In 1974, a famous case called Milliken versus Bradley. In 1974, a famous case called Milliken versus Bradley undermines the power of the 1954 Supreme Court decision. In 1974, Milliken versus Bradley, Richard Nixon is president. Nixon is president, and the Nixon Supreme Court ruled that you could not force students to integrate across school districts. This is important, brothers and sisters. This is why you can have all white school districts right across the street from an all black school district, because in 1974, in a case known as Milliken versus Bradley, the Richard Nixon Supreme Court said that you can only force integration within the district. You can only force integration within the district. You can only force integration within the district. You cannot force integration across the district. In other words, Philadelphia School District cannot go to Lower Merion and say, we are all black, you are all white, send some of your white kids to us, and we're going to send some of our black kids to you. You can't do that. You can't do that. If the school district is predominantly white and they don't have enough black kids, the law says, so what? If a school district is predominantly black and they don't have enough white kids, the law says, so what? You cannot force schools to integrate across districts. And why did they do that? Why did the Supreme Court, 20 years after Brown, say you cannot force schools to integrate across district? The reason they did that is they wanted to protect. The reason they did that is they wanted to protect. The reason they did that is they wanted to protect white school districts. They wanted to protect white school districts from having to integrate with black ones. They wanted to protect all white school districts from ever having to integrate with black ones. Do y'all see that? Do y'all see that? Because when the Brown decision came down, all white neighborhoods, we don't want them black kids going to our school. So Richard Nixon got the Supreme Court to shut that down. Richard Nixon got the Supreme Court to shut that down. And the Supreme Court shut it down by saying you can only force integration within a district. You cannot force integration across the district. Facts. Facts. And then also in 1974, you get another case called Lau versus Nichols. Chinese. Lau versus Nichols. Here comes the Chinese parents again. Here comes the Chinese parents again. Here comes the Chinese parents again. In Lau versus Nichols, benefiting from rights that blacks fought for. Benefiting from rights that blacks fought for. Benefiting from rights that blacks fought for, 1,800 Chinese students were given bilingual education when the court found that San Francisco, California School District, the San Francisco, California School District, violated the 1964 Civil Rights Act by not guaranteeing the Chinese children ESOL. ESOL. If you don't speak English,
you still have a right to a public education. If you don't speak English, you still have a right to a public education, and they have to provide you with English instruction known as ESOL. This is what the African parents need to do now. The African parents in America need to come together and organize with Dr. Umar Johnson as the expert educational consultant, and they need to sue. They need to sue that the school districts in America are violating the 1964 Civil Rights Bill by not giving African immigrant children English instruction and are instead systematically discriminating against them and denying them a quality education by throwing them in special education. I will repeat, the African immigrant parents living in the United States of America need to organize with Dr. Umar as one of their educational consultants and sue every school district in America, sue them up to the Supreme Court for systematically denying African immigrant children a quality education by denying them ESOL and by putting them in special education when they do not need it. The Equal Education Opportunity Act, the Equal Education Opportunity Act prevents the denial of education for race, color, sex, national origin, or language barrier. You cannot deny education for language barriers. Make sure y'all remember that. You cannot deny education for language barrier. Even with some of our African Latinos, even for some of our Afro-Ricans and Afro-Cubans, Afro-Dominicans, okay, African Haitians who only speak French. A lot of them come to America and are denied education because of language. It is illegal. You cannot deny a child education due to language. 504, Sister Casey, 504 has always been an option since 1973. The Rehabilitation Act was put forth from Congress in 1973. So any child from 1973 until now had a right to get a 504 instead of an IEP. Every child in America from 1973 until today, and we don't get ADHD until 1980. We don't get ADHD till 1980, okay? So from 1973 until now, every child in America had a right to a 504 instead of special ed. You want to know why you didn't know that? You want to know why you didn't know that? You want to know why you didn't know that? The schools didn't tell you that, and the schools didn't teach you that. And the reason the schools didn't tell you that, and the reason the schools didn't teach you that is because they get paid for special ed. They don't get paid for 504. They get paid for special ed. They don't get paid for 504. Schools receive welfare checks for putting kids in special education. Schools do not receive welfare checks for giving children 504. And that's why they never tell you about 504. That's why you got to read this book. That's why you got to read my book. This is the only book in print. This is the only book in print. This is the only book in print that has ever taught black parents in America how to fight back against the miseducation machine, the ADHD machine, the mental retardation machine, the Ritalin machine, the conduct disorder machine, the autism machine, the emotionally disturbance machine. This book is history. This book is a solution. If this book is not on your bookshelf and you raising black children, I'm going to question how serious you are. Okay? This is not a Hotep book. This is not a Hotep book. Intellectual masturbation without a solution. Intellectual masturbation without a solution. This book is nothing but solutions, and you should only buy my book from me. You should only buy my book from me. Do not purchase on Amazon. It is bootleg. It is cheaper paper. It is a cheaper copy. It is thinner. It won't last as long. The pages fall out. Get your book from Dr. Umar, and I will post the book link when I'm done my live stream. I will post the book link when I'm done my live stream. If you ain't read this, you ain't ready. If you ain't read this, you ain't ready. Get your copy signed in Brooklyn, June 2nd. Get your copy signed in Minnesota, June 14th. Get your copy signed in Seattle, June 17th. Get your copy signed Washington, D.C., June 24th. Get your copy signed Fort Lauderdale, Florida, September 30th. Get your copy signed Houston, Texas, December 30th. Solutions. Not Hotep, solutions. I got to figure out what dashiki I'm going to wear for the lecture tonight. Go rock this one. Or this one. Or this one. Or this one. Y'all know I'm king of the dashikis, right? They call me Mr. Dashiki. Or this one. Or this one. I got to find out the right dashiki to wear tonight. But anyway, let's keep on going. 1975, special ed is created. 1975, special ed is created. In 1975, special ed is created, called the Education for All Handicapped Children Act, EHCA. Children with disabilities have a right to a free and appropriate public education, but you and I both know that black children with disabilities don't ever get an appropriate public education. Also in 1975, a court case known as Lopez versus Goss. A court case known as Lopez versus Goss says if a child is suspended, listen to me, y'all. For y'all parents whose children keep getting suspended, you need to listen right now. If you got that badass little boy who you ain't never taught no discipline to, he always getting suspended, I need you to listen right now. If you got a badass little boy who's always getting in trouble, I need you to listen right now. Let me check the time. The time is 12:30. I'm gonna have to go downstairs and get me some lunch soon, so I'm gonna have to wrap up soon and finish this later because I need to feed this cold I got. Okay? And Lopez versus Goss, if a child is suspended from school for up to 10 days, remember, principal cannot suspend 11 or more, only the Board of Education. Principal cannot suspend a child from school for 11 days or more. Any suspension of 11 days or more must be made by the board. That is called a temporary expulsion. A temporary expulsion. 11 days or more is a temporary expulsion. A principal cannot expel, only the school board. The principal cannot expel, only the school board. Listen up, parents. If the child is suspended from school up to a maximum of 10 days, the student, not the parent, the student, not the parent, the student, not the parent, must, number one, receive knowledge of the charges against them. Number two, knowledge of the evidence against them. Number three, they must be given a right to tell their story. Did y'all hear what I just said? This is called educational due process for the student. I need y'all to hear this. So if your child is suspended from school, you should ask your child, did they tell you why? Did they tell you the evidence against you? And did you have a chance to tell your story? I'm going to say it again. I hope y'all listening. Are y'all listening right now? Parents, y'all need to hear this. Whenever your child is suspended from school, you must ask your child, did they receive some due process? Did they receive their due process? Remember, constitutional rights are guaranteed in school. Constitutional rights are guaranteed in school. Constitutional rights are guaranteed in school. Okay? When your child is suspended, Ask them, did they get their due process? What is their due process? 3 steps. Did they tell you why you are being suspended? Did they tell you the evidence against you? And were you given a chance to explain your case? Your child has a right to know the charges. Your child has a right to see the evidence. Your child has a right to defend themselves. If your child isn't told why they got suspended, if your child isn't given the evidence of the suspension, if your child is denied the right to tell their story, your child has been denied due process, and you should take that to the superintendent. You should take that to the Department of Education, Office of Civil Rights. You must know your rights. This is for every public and charter school in the United States. This is for every public and charter school in the United. Yes, he can get a 504. Yes, he can get a 504. All you have to do is write a letter to the school. I would like a meeting to develop a 504 plan for my son who's diagnosed with ADHD, for my son who has depression, for my daughter who's epileptic, for my son who's diabetic. Any medical, psychological, physical condition that affects their ability to receive their education, they can get a 504. Stop giving IEPs. IEPs are the official papers for the school to prison pipeline. The IEP is an official paper for the school to prison pipeline. The IEP is an official paper for the school to prison pipeline. Facts. (1977), a case is called Ingram versus Wright. In a case called Ingram versus Wright, the courts ruled that corporal punishment does not violate Eighth Amendment protection against cruel and unusual punishment. If the family thinks that punishment was cruel, they can bring the suit against the district. Did everybody hear what I said? That was also important. Did you hear what I just said? In Ingram versus Wright, in Ingram versus Wright, the court said paddling a child is not a violation of their Eighth Amendment of cruel and unusual punishment. It is legal in America to paddle children. It is legal in America to paddle children. It is legal in America to paddle children. However, your state may make it illegal for the state. It is legal in the country, but your state might make a decision that no child can be paddled in our state. I live in Pennsylvania. I live in Pennsylvania. I live in Pennsylvania. In Pennsylvania, a child can be paddled. In Pennsylvania, corporal punishment is allowed. There are schools in Pennsylvania who still paddle. Okay? Yes, you can paddle children in school. Yes, you can. Yes, you can. You can paddle some children in school. Yes. Okay? And guess what? I might do some paddling at Fred Douglass Marcus Garvey. That's right. I might spank that ass at Fred Douglass and Marcus Garvey. We going back to the basics, baby. We going back to the basics. Okay? Then in 1979, in a case called Larry P. versus Riles, 1979, in a court case known as Larry P. versus Riles, IQ tests used to assess black children for educationally mentally retarded classes are culturally biased. Did y'all hear that? What did I just say? In 1979, the Supreme Court ruled that IQ tests, the same ones they use today, IQ tests used to evaluate black children are culturally biased. It comes right from the state. Right from the court. Right from the court. Okay? But then the next year, it was overturned. The next year, they came right back, and Parents in Action on Special Ed versus J.P. Hannon courts ruled IQ tests are not culturally biased and do not discriminate against black children. Why do you think they changed it around? Because special ed was created in 75. They changed it around in 1980 because if you say IQ tests are biased, how are we going to use special ed to disadvantage black kids? If you say the IQ tests are biased, how the hell we going to use special ed to destroy black kids if you admit that the IQ tests are biased? So the courts sided with white supremacy, reversed the 1979 decision, and in 1980 reasserted that IQ tests used for black kids are not culturally biased. They had to reverse it because if they didn't reverse it, special ed today might not exist the way it exists. So they had to change the law because the law serves white supremacy. And white supremacy needs your son to get that IQ test so they can say he retarded. White supremacy needs your daughter to get that IQ test so they can say she needs special ed. White supremacy needs your child to get that IQ test so they can say they got a reading disability. Excuse me. 1982. A Mississippi University for Women versus Hogan, 1982. Mississippi University for Women versus Hogan said, men can no longer be excluded from enrolling in state-operated nursing schools. Public schools cannot discriminate on the basis of gender. Gender roles. Did y'all hear that? A public school cannot discriminate on the basis of gender role. In other words, if you have a nursing school that's publicly funded, you can't say it's only for women. If you got a military school for men, you can't exclude women because it's an occupational school. Now, if you got a school for boys, it can be all boys. If you got a school for girls, it can be all girls. But if it is an occupation school, you can't discriminate. But what's ironic is you can have an all-girls school, and you can have an all-boys school, and you can have an all-gay school. Now, shout out to Barack Obama for homosexualizing the black community. Shout out to Barack Obama for homosexualizing the black community. Shout out to Barack Hussein Obama for homosexualizing the black community. Now you can have an all-gay school, but you can't have an all-black school. You can have an all-Christian school. You can have an all-Muslim school. You can have an all-girls school. You can have an all-boys school. You can have an all-gay school. But you can't have an all-black school. Ain't that some shit? Ain't that deep? You can have any kind of school you want as long as it's not all black. Ain't that some shit? White supremacy, boy. White supremacy. Also, in another case, the Board of Education of Island Trees versus Pico, the Supreme Court ruled you cannot throw books out of school libraries because you don't like their ideas. It must be related to issues of educational suitability and not political reasons. Did y'all hear that? This is why you got racism in the textbooks today. This is why you have racism in the textbooks today. This is why you have racism in the textbooks today. Because in 1982, the Supreme Court ruled that you cannot get rid of textbooks because you don't like what's in them. You cannot get rid of textbooks because you don't like what's in them. In 1982, the United States Supreme Court said you cannot get rid of textbooks because you don't like what's in them. You can only get rid of textbooks because of educational suitability, but not for political reasons. Yep. In Texas, right? In Texas, they're changing the school books to say slaves were not in America, indentured servants, right? They're now calling enslaved Africans indentured servants, the Texas State Board of Education. You're not going to be able to get rid of that book. You're not going to be able to get rid of that book. Why? Because the Supreme Court said you can't get rid of books just because you don't like them. You can't get rid of books for political reasons, only for educational suitability. Facts. Facts. In 1985, another major case. In 1985, another major case known as New Jersey versus TLO. In 1985, another major case known as New Jersey versus TLO said public school officials only need to have reasonable suspicion and not probable cause to search your child's possessions. This is important for y'all parents to know. This is important for y'all parents to know. If I'm principal at the Frederick Douglass Marcus Garvey Academy, if I'm principal at the Frederick Douglass Marcus Garvey Academy, if I'm principal at the Frederick Douglass Marcus Garvey Academy, which I will be, I can search your child's book bag. I can search your daughter's pocketbook. I can search the locker. I can search their pockets if I have a reasonable suspicion that they have something that is harmful or forbidden. Did y'all hear that? Schools can search your child, but they must have reasonable suspicion. Police cannot search. Police cannot search. Police cannot search your child unless they have probable cause. Probable cause is higher than reasonable suspicion. Probable cause is higher than reasonable suspicion. Principal needs reasonable suspicion. Police need probable cause. $1988, the year my parents enrolled me at the Scotland School for Veterans Children in Chambersburg, Pennsylvania. In 1988, the courts ruled that public school officials can control the written word of students in newspapers if the reasons are related to legitimate educational purposes. Okay? Remember what I said earlier. First Amendment right to free speech and expression in public school can be controlled if it disrupts the educational environment. First Amendment rights to free speech and expression can be controlled if it disrupts the educational process. In 1988, Honing versus Doe, the courts ruled that special education students cannot be removed from school without agreement between parent and the school. This led to the current 10 to 15-day suspension rule for special ed children. Mentally retarded children cannot be suspended for even 1 day without this agreement. A manifestation determination is an outgrowth of this law. Special ed students cannot be removed from school, okay? They cannot be suspended unless their educational placement cannot be changed unless their disability was not a function, unless the behavior was not a function of the disability, okay? I need y'all to understand this. I need y'all to understand this. If your child is in special ed and they get in trouble, if your child is in special ed and they get in trouble, the school has 10 days total that it can suspend your child. After 10 days, they cannot suspend your child anymore unless the parent comes and participates in a meeting known as a manifestation determination, and they determine that the behavior is not a function of the disability. If the behavior is a function of the disability, the child cannot be suspended any additional days. If the behavior is a function of the disability, the child cannot be suspended any additional days. If the child is retarded, if your child is intellectually disabled, if your child has an intellectual disability, they cannot ever be suspended from school unless the parent is called in and a manifestation determination meeting is held, and it must be determined that the behavior was not a function of the child's disability. If the retarded child does something that is a function of the disability, they cannot be taken out of school ever. Did y'all hear that? Did y'all hear what I just said? If your child is retarded, if your child is diagnosed with intellectual disability, intellectually disabled children cannot be suspended from school unless the school can prove that the behavior was not a function of the disability. You cannot suspend retarded kids. Basically, you can't suspend retarded kids. You can't. You cannot suspend retarded kids. If they're not retarded, they can be suspended for 10 days. After 10 days, they cannot be suspended anymore unless the behavior is not a function of their disability. And if they're suspended beyond 10 days, the school must create alternative learning programs for that person. Okay? 1990, Public Law 94-142 becomes the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. They rename special ed law, and it becomes 101-476. Disability is used in place of handicap. Autism is added to the special ed list for the first time in 1990. Autism is added to the special ed list for the first time in 1990. Autism is added as a special ed disability for the first time in 1990 with the reauthorization of the special ed law. In 1991, Minnesota passes the first charter school law. 1991, Minnesota passes the first charter school law. In 1995, a case known as Vernonia School District versus Acton. 1995, in a case known as Vernonia School District versus Acton, student athletes can randomly receive drug testing, but students in extracurricular activities cannot be tested. You can test your student athletes randomly, but you cannot test students who are in extracurricular activities. Okay? Did y'all hear that? Random drug testing is allowed for student athletes. It is not allowed for extracurricular students. I believe the rationale is because if this child is an athlete, taking drugs can enhance their performance, which can lead to an unfair advantage against other school teams in sports competitions. I believe that's the rationale. But if the kid is on the chess team or if the kid is on the robotics team, taking drugs isn't necessarily going to give them an undue advantage over the other children. 2001, No Child Left Behind, George Bush. 2001, No Child Left Behind, George Bush. 2001, No Child Left Behind Act, George Bush. It is the reauthorization of the 1965 Elementary and Secondary Education Act that we already talked about. It takes money from poor districts and gives it to rich ones. George Bush said, if your children don't learn, I'm going to take money from you. This helped lead to the current public school shutdown movement we have now. This has led to the current public school shutdown movement that we have now. It demands that everyone learn to read and write on grade level, but doesn't tell you how to get them up. It forces poor school districts to open up high schools to all branches of the armed service. U.S. military is given a right to view all students' files beginning in the 8th grade. Okay? No Child Left Behind was about military, not learning. No Child Left Behind was about military, not learning. No Child Left Behind was about the military, not learning. Why does Dr. Umar Johnson say No Child Left Behind is about the military? Because No Child Left Behind gave the United States military the right to come into your child's school beginning in the 8th grade and look at their academic and personal record to determine if they should target them to be brought into the military. Some of y'all don't know this, but the Army, the Navy, the Marine Corps, the Coast Guard, they can view student records. They can view student records. And they look at those records, and that's how they determine who they're going to prey upon to ultimately have them sign into the military. This is true. This is very true. Who they're going to prey upon to ultimately have them sign onto the military. Some of y'all don't know this. Keep your children out the military. 2004, we get IDEIA 2004. So we get 3 special ed laws, right? 1975 was the first one. 1990 was the second one. 2004 was the third one. Is passed, the laws for which went into effect in 2006. Free and appropriate public education continues. District must provide for related services and prepare children for employment. If your child is in special ed, I need you to understand that the school district has a right to provide them with related services and post-graduation employment and education. If your child is in special ed in high school, if your child is in special ed in high school, if your child is in special ed, make sure the school prepares. They have to help special ed kids prepare for life after high school. Yes, training, college, community college, work. They have to help them. It's called transition planning. Black kids don't get no transition planning because black parents don't know that the child is entitled to transition planning. Soon when your child comes back for the ninth grade, you need to start talking about transitional planning. Soon as your child comes back for the ninth grade, you should start talking about transitional planning. Make them earn their paycheck. They're supposed to be, they help the white kids. The white kids get they set them up for college and jobs and trade school. They don't never do nothing for the black kids. If your child is in special ed in high school, they have the obligation. This is the law. Special ed law says you must help the high schoolers transition into life. It also says that you must provide related service, counseling, taking the bus. That's right, parents. If your special ed child needs to take the bus to school, tell them you want that on the IEP. Don't sign the IEP unless it says your child can take the bus. Don't sign the IEP unless it says your child can take the bus. Don't sign the IEP unless it says your child can take the bus. Also, IDEIA 04, the ruling special ed law, says that there's a 2-year statute of limitation on educational lawsuit. Did y'all hear that, parents? You have 2 years to sue the schools. You have 2 years to sue the school for special education issues. You have 2 years. Before there was no statute of limitation. Your child is 18. He graduates at 18. You find out at 21 he was never retarded. You want to sue the school for diagnosing your child as retarded. It's too late. You took 3 years. You only get 2. You took 3 years. You only get 2. Statute of limitations for special ed cases are only 2 years. Make sure y'all on y'all game. Statute of limitation for special ed, 2 years. Make sure you are on your game. Also, they can change the IEP on you if they cannot reach you. They can change the IEP without a meeting, but they need your permission. They can change the IEP without a meeting, but they need your permission. Okay? Make sure if you don't hear from the IEP team, you contact them. Make sure they have your cell phone. Text me. No excuses. You can text me when you need me. I don't want to hear you try to call me. I don't want to hear you sent the letter. Text me when you need me. That's what I would do if I was you. Text me when it's time for a meeting. It also says you can have a reeval waiver. Your child doesn't have to be reevaluated every 3 years. I don't know why you would ever agree to this. Never sign the waiver for nothing. A waiver is always waiving your rights. Don't forget that. A waiver is always waiving your rights. Don't forget that. A waiver is always waiving your rights. Don't forget that. Don't ever waive your rights. Don't ever waive your rights. Don't ever waive your rights, okay? You want your child to be reevaluated every 3 years so you can know what the hell they talking and teaching. You want your child to be reevaluated every 3 years so you can know whether they're learning or not. You never waive that. That would be stupid. Also, if a special ed child brings weapons or drugs to school, that the school can put them in an immediate 45-day interim placement without a manifestation. If a special ed child brings weapons or drugs to school, the school can put them in an immediate 45-day interim placement without a manifestation determination meeting. Okay? So that's my little educational law seminar. I hope you guys liked it. I hope you learned something from that. Okay, the Prince of Pan-Africanism coming to you live and direct from Beijing, China, where I will be speaking at tonight, 7 o'clock. Looking forward to meeting the African community of Beijing, sign some books, take some pictures. This has been a good 2 weeks in Asia. Tomorrow, the day after, I'll do some sightseeing before I head back to the United States. Okay.
We will resume the Tuesday morning Black Parent Call. We will resume the Tuesday morning Black Parent Call. We will resume the Tuesday morning Black Parent Call when I get back to the States. Keep me in your prayers for a safe travel. Keep me in your prayers to help me overcome this cold. Still ain't got my body strength back, but I got to keep it going for the movement. Okay. June 2nd, Brooklyn. June 2nd, Brooklyn. June 2nd, Brooklyn. June 9th and 10th, Detroit. I want all y'all to be there for the training. Everybody on my live feed, I want to see you in Detroit for the training on June 9th and 10th. Minneapolis on the 14th, Seattle on the 17th, DC on the 25th. Minneapolis on the 14th of June, Seattle on the 17th of June, Washington, DC on the 25th of June. Race First Renegade, Prince of Pan-Africanism. I'm out.